The battlefield stretched wide under a gray, unforgiving sky, the ground trembling with the roar of 200 German tanks advancing like a steel wave. Most soldiers would have felt hopeless at the sight, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the armored division, the grinding certainty of destruction. But 7 Kazakh men saw something different. Opportunity. They weren't generals, and they had no heavy weapons. They had no reinforcements, no artillery, and certainly no hope in conventional terms. What they had was ingenuity, courage, and a willingness to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. With nothing but bars of soap, grease, and their knowledge of the local terrain, they began to improvise. They spread soap along key stretches of road, knowing that when the massive tanks tried to maneuver, their tracks would slip and skid. They cut down small trees and laid them at angles that forced the armored columns to swerve or slow, creating choke points where one misstep could immobilize a tank and throw the rest into chaos. Every action was calculated, simple in its execution but devastating in its effect. It was the kind of improvisation that comes not from training manuals, but from quick thinking under pressure and a refusal to accept defeat. The Germans, confident in their numbers and armor, never anticipated that a few men could turn smooth roads into treacherous traps. When the first tanks hit the soap-covered patches, they slid uncontrollably, grinding to a halt against the embankments or colliding with one another. Skids and spins echoed across the valley, the synchronized precision of the armored division unraveling with every tank that faltered. The Kazakhs moved with agility and precision, exploiting every slip, every stumble, every pause. They were small, but they became the heartbeat of the battlefield, orchestrating disorder with nothing more than human cunning and everyday materials. What made their action remarkable wasn't just the technical cleverness. It was their fearlessness. Each man was exposed, small against the massive machines, and yet none hesitated. They had to improvise, think, and act in real time, turning what seemed like absurd tools, soap and grease, into instruments of control. The physics of the battlefield became their ally. Slick surfaces, narrow roads, and the inertia of massive tanks worked in their favor because they understood how to manipulate them. It was not brute force. It was intelligence, observation, and courage executed under extreme pressure. Witnesses later reported that the German tank crews were bewildered. Their commanders shouted orders, trying to regain control, but the momentum had shifted. Tanks that had been poised to crush resistance were immobilized by ingenuity alone. And the Kazakhs seized every moment to maintain confusion. The roar of engines turned into a chorus of skids, metal scraping metal, and frustrated commands shouted into the wind. In the space of an hour, a division that had seemed unstoppable was slowed to a crawl by 7 men who refused to surrender to conventional expectations. This moment wasn't just a tactical victory. It was a lesson in the power of human ingenuity and resourcefulness. The Kazakhs turned the battlefield into a laboratory of improvisation, proving that cleverness, courage, and an understanding of the environment could outmatch sheer numerical strength. They reminded everyone, including their enemies, that even the most overwhelming force could be challenged with creativity and daring. It was an act that seemed impossible, almost mythical. Yet it happened in real time, shaping the course of the encounter in ways that would echo far beyond that valley. By the time the hour passed, the German tanks were stuck, disoriented, and vulnerable, and the 7 men had etched their names into the story of resistance. What they accomplished with nothing but soap, determination, and a deep understanding of the battlefield remains one of the most astonishing examples of ingenuity overcoming impossible odds in the history of warfare. The chaos created by the 7 Kazakhs did more than just halt a column of tanks. It left the entire German division bewildered and disoriented. In the hour that followed, what should have been a precise, unstoppable advance turned into confusion and retreat. The tanks, designed for power and speed, had been rendered almost useless by something as simple as soap, slick roads, and clever obstacles. Every officer on the ground struggled to regain control, barking orders, gesturing frantically, but the momentum had slipped beyond their grasp. The division, once a symbol of relentless force, seemed to vanish from the battlefield as if swallowed by the very terrain they sought to dominate. Back in Berlin, Hitler received the reports with fury. A massive armored division, expected to crush resistance and secure its objective, had been brought to a standstill by a handful of men using nothing but ingenuity. He could not comprehend it. Generals scrambled to explain, using terms like terrain difficulties or unexpected obstacles. But the reality was stranger, more humiliating, and far more infuriating. A few untrained soldiers, improvising with everyday materials, had outmaneuvered his mechanized might. Orders to investigate and recover the stalled division were issued. But by the time reinforcements could arrive, the Kazakhs' work had already altered the battlefield. Confusion lingered, morale dipped, and the precision of the German advance was broken. The disappearance of the division was as much psychological as it was tactical. Soldiers accustomed to invincibility began to doubt themselves. Commanders who relied on strict hierarchies found their control slipping. Because the machines and men they thought reliable could be undone by something they hadn't prepared for. Panic and uncertainty spread through the ranks faster than any tank could move. In a war driven by calculation, discipline, and the expectation of obedience, the unpredictability introduced by a few clever soldiers created a ripple effect that undermined even the most powerful army. Meanwhile, the 7 Kazakhs didn't linger to celebrate. They had no illusions about their safety. They moved, watched, and adapted, knowing that their lives depended on staying one step ahead. Yet their actions left an enduring mark on the enemy. Every commander who reported that hour of confusion felt the sting of humiliation. And Hitler himself could not hide his anger. It was not merely a tactical failure. It was an affront to the doctrine of power he valued above all. That a small, seemingly insignificant group could create chaos and vanish before being captured challenged the very image of invincibility the Nazis projected across Europe. The retreat, the bewilderment, and the sudden disappearance of the division became a story whispered in mess halls and command rooms. Soldiers who had been part of the stalled advance described the event in disbelief, unable to reconcile the scale of their machine with the simplicity of the obstacle. Some believed they had been cursed, that luck or supernatural interference had stalled their machinery. Others chalked it up to poor leadership or unfortunate terrain. Yet all accounts pointed to the same truth. The Kazakhs had turned vulnerability into an advantage, exploiting the limits of an army that relied on precision and power. In the grand scope of the war, the event was small, a single encounter in a long campaign. But its symbolism was immense. It proved that strategy alone could be overturned by intelligence, courage, and quick thinking. It proved that even Hitler, the man who demanded obedience and efficiency, could be humbled by an unexpected act of ingenuity. And it proved that a handful of brave individuals, acting with clarity and daring, could make an entire division disappear, leaving behind only the story of how courage and cunning outmatched sheer force. The legacy of that hour lives on not because of destruction, but because of audacity. The 7 Kazakhs showed that even in the face of overwhelming power, human creativity and bravery could tilt the balance. And for the soldiers, the officers, and even Hitler himself, it was a lesson that would not be forgotten. The battlefield is never entirely predictable, and the smallest spark of ingenuity can ignite chaos in the mightiest of machines.